Senator Joe Donnelly of Indiana met with Hendricks County government officials in Brownsburg last week. Alyssa Schukar for the New York Times BROWNSBURG. The courtship started out well enough. President Trump invited Senator Joe Donnelly of Indiana and two other Democrats to the White House for dinner to talk about his tax plan. It was civil and I thought he was really interested in what I had to say, Mr. Donnelly remembered, adding, "It was not a show." The president later asked Mr. Donnelly, who is up for re-election next year, to join him on Air Force One to travel to Indiana in late September to formally roll out the proposal, and to ride with him in the presidential motorcade. And then the show began. With the lights bright and the crowd at the state fairgrounds applauding, the president abruptly changed his tone. "If Senator Donnelly doesn't approve it because, you know, he's on the other side, we will come here. We will campaign against him like you wouldn't believe," Mr. Trump said. It was a now familiar Trump maneuver, a combination of cajolement and threat that the president is likely to increasingly employ with Democrats like Mr. Donnelly because of the fractious relationship he has with his own party. The easy time Senate Republicans had passing a budget resolution Thursday night is not expected to be repeated when they take up a tax bill, and Mr. Trump will need every vote he can get. For Mr. Donnelly, his hold on office already perilous, supporting a Republican tax bill is only the latest possibility he must consider in the delicate dance of running for another term next year in a state Mr. Trump carried by nearly 20 points. He needs Republicans in great numbers to cross over and vote for him, so being on the wrong side of Mr. Trump carries great risk. At the same time, he must not alienate his Democratic base, many of whom distrust any kind of relationship with the president. After the president called him out, Mr. Donnelly tried to laugh it off in the moment, but did not find it funny. "This is something I have not experienced before," he said in an interview in this suburb of Indianapolis. "I actually told his folks, you have one of the most unusual sales tactics I have ever seen. I said, in my experience when you are trying to have someone like your product or buy your product, you're usually nice to your customer. More important, the ultimatum did little to get the president closer to winning Mr. Donnelly's support. I happen to be an Irish American," he said, adding, "Threatening me is like waving the red flag in front of the bull." Yet no Democrat in the Senate is more at risk than Mr. Donnelly, who won his first Senate term in 2012 when he defeated Richard Mourdock, a Republican whose fortunes plunged after he said in a debate that if a woman was raped and became pregnant, it was something that God intended to happen. After voting in 2008 for Barack Obama, the first Democrat to carry the state since Lyndon Johnson in 1964, Indiana has reverted to its reliably Republican status. That was made clear last year when Evan Bayh, a Democrat who had been a popular two-term governor and senator, lost badly in his bid to regain his Senate seat. Mr. Donnelly, whose Republican opponent will be determined by a primary next May, is considered a centrist in his party and has carefully nurtured a voting record that avoids easy branding by Republicans as too liberal. He travels the state relentlessly and rarely misses an opportunity to tell voters that he cares more about policy than party. His staff churns out news releases and social media posts that highlight the word bipartisan. At a roundtable discussion at a drug treatment center here to discuss the state's emerging opioid crisis, Mr. Donnelly was patient and soft-spoken as he took in the views from counselors, family advocates and law enforcement officers. "I work for you guys," he said, while also noting the millions of dollars he had helped secure for the state for the effort. Mr. Trump may not be the only one with Mr. Donnelly in his sights. Americans for Prosperity, an independent group backed by the Koch brothers, is spending $1.9 million on ads this month to try to pressure him on his vote. "Don't let Senator Donnelly stand in the way of a simple, fair tax system," the narrator concludes. President Trump with Mr. Donnelly, right upon their arrival in Indianapolis last month. Aaron Cummings, Associated Press. Another group has been tracking Mr. Donnelly's every public movement for 5 months, in an effort to record any political missteps, even his walk to his car after his appearance at the drug treatment facility. But it was Mr. Trump's highly public chastening of Mr. Donnelly that showed just how deftly the senator needs to move to navigate his conservative state. "He laughed after he did it," Mr. Donnelly said. "I think for him, it was part of the moment, part of the show. I'm a big boy. I've had worse than that done to me over the years. Natalie Strom, a White House spokeswoman, said that Mr. Trump is committed to working with anyone in Congress truly interested in providing tax relief to the American people, adding that the only unusual thing about his dealings with Mr. Donnelly is that the senator is still siding with Chuck Schumer instead of supporting tax relief and economic growth for the people of Indiana. Mr. Trump's form of pressure also has not been particularly effective with two other vulnerable Democrats, Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota. Mr. Manchin, who attended the dinner with Mr. Donnelly and whose support for a tax bill is also coveted by the White House, said the president greeted him warmly, then offered a dig. "Joe, if I had really pushed on you I could have gotten you to vote for a repeal on health care, and I said, Mr. President, that would not have happened," Mr. Manchin recalled, then noted that he had great camaraderie with Mr. Trump. "We've had that little joust," Mr. Manchin said. "It never bothered me. It also did not move him to the president's position, at least not yet." All three senators said they were open to supporting the president's tax plan, but so far, Mr. Trump has not offered enough detail or shown that his plan would focus on providing sizable middle-class tax relief. Mr. Manchin said that Mr. Trump has not really made the transition from negotiating tactics that work in the private sector, like bluster and intimidation, to those that work in the public sector. "It takes a little more diplomacy in the public sector," Mr. Manchin said. For Ms. Heitkamp, the issue is less style than substance. When the president pushed for tax legislation in North Dakota, a state he won by 36 points, she, too, accompanied him on Air Force One. With an oil refinery as a backdrop, the president revved up the crowd, but was solicitous of her. "Come on up, Senator," Mr. Trump said. "These are great people. They work hard. They're for you 100%. He later added, "So thank you, Senator." Senator Heitkamp, "Everyone is saying, what's she doing up here, but I'll tell you what, good woman, and I think we'll have your support. I hope we'll have your support. And thank you very much, Senator." As he pitched his plan, Mr. Trump went on, "Are you listening, Heidi?" "Thank you, Heidi," he added. "We're not going to put her on the spot, Mr. Manchin and Ms. Heitkamp also have home state energy interests, coal and oil drilling, that align with Mr. Trump and Republicans more than with their fellow Democrats." For his part, Mr. Donnelly is trying to win the president's approval for his legislation to curtail corporate outsourcing, which has been responsible for thousands of job losses in his state. None of them can afford to totally alienate the White House. The awkward moment in Indiana with the president would not be a deterrent to working with him when possible, Mr. Donnelly said. Indeed, on the return flight to Washington, it was as if nothing had happened. Mr. Trump cheerily came to the rear of the plane and asked Mr. Donnelly and some others into his conference room. "He could not have been nicer," Mr. Donnelly said.